Grandma's eyes. She was my best friend when I was growing up. She was my confidant and my reassurance. My grandma was everything a grandma should be, and more. From as far back as I could remember, I could always look into Grandma's eyes and find that special place. She encouraged me to dream, she taught me to cook, she listened to my crazy stories, and she was always there to protect me. We had our arguments because she thought I was perfect, and I made a point of assuring her I wasn't. She took me fishing, taught me how to bait a hook, and stood by proudly as I reeled in my first fish. And I would look into her eyes and see everything she wanted me to be, everything she knew I would one day be. Grandma loved everyone and everyone loved her. I spent many summers with her laughing and fishing and talking. She showed me how to treat people. She showed me that everyone had worth. Rich or homeless, she treated everyone the same. I really think it was her eyes that captivated people. They say the eyes are the window to the soul. I know that this is true because when I looked into Grandma's eyes, I could see a soul as pure as heaven. She was a salt of the earth, the person I aspired to emulate. At the tender age of 10 years old, I underwent 2 critical surgeries for a ruptured brain aneurysm. When I was going through these surgeries, Grandma came and stayed with me. My single mother went to work every day to put food on the table for my brother and I, and Grandma watched after me. She loved me like only a grandma could. When I became angry or afraid, she would reassure me that everything would be okay. She taught me to have faith in God. And when I looked into her eyes, the pain would go away because I knew Grandma loved me. I was in my late teens in my bedroom when I heard my mother yell for me from the living room of our house. I ran to the living room and saw Grandma on the floor by the couch. My mother, who never panicked, was frightened as she told me to start the car. Grandma had just had a stroke. I ran to the car and started it, and then I ran back into the house. I cradled Grandma in my arms as I carried her to the car. I placed her in the back seat with my mother and propped her head on my mother's shoulder. As I drove us to the hospital, I looked in the rearview mirror. Grandma was not speaking, and I could see the fear on my mother's face. But the thing I remembered most from that day was my grandma's eyes. As I drove down the freeway, I was looking in the rearview mirror directly into the eyes of my grandma. Grandma's eyes were always deep, but on that day I could see everything. Even at that age I knew Grandma was telling me goodbye. Not anyone else, just me. The bond we had was stronger than any words could ever express. She was silently telling me everything would be okay. She was silently telling me I would become a man she would be proud of. Her eyes said it all, and I heard every silent, unspoken word. As I drove, I allowed those silent words to permeate through my mind and my soul. I could feel Grandma in my heart like I had never felt her before. I knew she was preparing to go home, and I knew she was telling me goodbye. We arrived at the hospital and I carried Grandma in my arms. The doctors took her and tended to her. Modern medicine was no match for God's will. He wanted Grandma to come home, and I believed Grandma was ready to be with him. She was admitted to the hospital and I went to visit her the very next day. I walked into her room, and when I looked into her eyes, she was gone. She was still alive, but there was no recognition in her eyes. My best friend didn't recognize me. I was scared and I left the room and called my mother. I cried as I told Mom that Grandma didn't know who I was. Mom told me Grandma had had another stroke after we had left that night, and things had taken a turn for the worse. Mom reassured me that Grandma could still hear us, and it was important that we speak to her and spend time with her. So I took a volunteer job at the hospital so I could spend time with Grandma after hours. I would sit by her bed and speak with her. She never responded, and I knew she wouldn't be with us much longer. But we continued to spend time with her. Eventually, she was moved to a convalescent hospital as there was no improvement. For 2 grueling years, my grandmother was non-responsive and kept alive by her pacemaker. God was calling her home, but modern medicine was determined to keep her bound to her earthly body. And then one night we got a phone call at home. I answered and a female voice asked for my mother. I told her my mother wasn't home and that I was her son. And then I heard the 4 coldest words I had ever heard. Alice Warren has expired. Expired. as if she were nothing more than an overdue library book. I fell to my knees and cried. My best friend had finally been set free to go home. Shortly thereafter, we laid Grandma to rest. We said goodbye that day until we meet again up yonder. But I still see Grandma's eyes. When I'm awake, when I'm asleep, I see her eyes. And in those eyes I find strength to be the man she always knew that I would be. In the years since Grandma passed, I have come to realize that God had not placed my grandma on this earth simply to teach me and take care of me. I now realize that Grandma had a far greater purpose. God had placed Grandma here to take care of and teach the world. God had given Grandma a gift which was meant to be shared with the universe. I had simply been blessed with the fact that this angel was my grandmother. Why is it that we don't truly appreciate a person, thing, or event until it has passed? Never for one moment did I ever really give thought to the fact Grandma would be gone someday. I sat and listened and laughed with her, all the while foolishly believing she would be by my side forever. I never entertained the thought she would be a distant memory one day. I loved her and she loved me, but I was never able to show my love to the depths I now feel. I loved her when she was here, with me, but I never realized she would someday be gone. I now live my life with a new understanding. I now understand that it is incumbent upon me to take ownership of and share the gift God had given to Grandma. I feel her in my soul to this very day, and I see her in the eyes of the man that looks back at me from the mirror. At some of the most impactful moments of my life, I hear her voice and feel her presence. She whispers to me when I sleep, and she tends to me when I need understanding. I believe there are many links in life, links that connect the souls of different generations of families. These links serve as a way for our loved ones to continue to live on. There are times I look into my son's eyes, and I see a faint whisper of Grandma looking back at me. His words often mirror her words, and he has been gifted with a deep understanding and compassion for people, the same deep understanding and compassion that Grandma showed me so many years ago. And even though they were never able to meet one another, the links are still there. And through this special gift from God, my grandma will continue to live on. This is Mitch Speed. Be blessed.